Hello friends, welcome to lesson 6, Gender and Biology. Introduction. Let us begin this lesson by asking few critical questions. What accounts for differences in female and male behavior and attitudes? Do the biological differences between the sexes account for other differences, or do these latter differences stem, as most sociologists think, from cultural expectations and from differences in which the ways in which the sexes are socialized? These are serious inquiries, for they ask whether the difference between boys and girls and women and men stem more from biology or from society. In the past, people tend to have very clear ideas about what was appropriate to each sex, and anyone behaving differently was regarded as deviant. Today, we accept a lot more diversity and see gender as a continuum, that is, as a scale rather than two categories. So, men are free to show their feminine side and women are free to show their masculine traits. Objectives. After completion of this lesson, you will be able to understand the various dimensions and points of intersection between gender and biology. So, let us begin our discussion about gender and biology. Sex is a biological categorization based primarily on reproductive potential, whereas gender is the social elaboration of biological sex. Gender builds on biological sex, but it exaggerates biological difference and it carries biological difference into domains in which it is completely irrelevant. But while we think of sex as biological and gender as social, this distinction is not clear cut. People tend to think of gender as the result of nurture, as social and hence fluid, where sex is the result of nature simply given by biology. However, nature and nurture, they intertwine. Sex is based in a combination of anatomical, endocrinal and chromosomal features, and the selection among these criteria for sex assignment is based very much on cultural beliefs about what actually makes someone male or female. Thus, the very definition of biological categories, male and female, and people's understanding of themselves and others as male or female is ultimately social. Genetic makeup and hormone profiles are both components of sex, that is, of biological characteristics which tend to be constant across societies. Gender is a social rather than a biological construct and varies with the cultural roles, norms and values of a given society or era. Being able to bear a child is fundamentally a function of biology, while expectations about the imperative to bear children, the nature of parenting or the status associated with being a mother are more closely linked to gender roles and expectations. At birth, humans are typically assigned to their biological sex, which is male or female, on the basis of their genitalia. But there is evidence from the fetal studies that sexual differentiation of the body occurs before the sexual differentiation of the brain. This gives the opportunity for considerable flexibility with regard to the social roles that are considered appropriate for males and females. These roles vary across societies such that it is appropriate to refer to sexes as male and female, but to their culturally influenced gender roles as masculine and feminine. Biology offers up dichotomous male and female prototypes but it also offers us many individuals who do not fit these prototypes in variety of ways. Blacklist and others estimate that 1 in 100 babies are born with bodies that differ in some way from standard male or female. These bodies may have such conditions as unusual chromosomal makeup. For example, 1 in 1000 male babies are born with two X chromosomes as well as a Y. Hormonal differences such as insensitivity to androgens, which is about 1 in 13,000 births, or a range of configurations and combinations of genitals and reproductive organs. When anomalous babies are born, surgical and or endocrinal manipulation may be used to bring their unruly bodies into a closer conformity with either the male or the female category. In recent years, gender activist organizations had considerable success as an advocacy group for the medical rights of intersex people, and the medical profession has become more sensitive to both physical and psychological issues associated with gender assignment and surgery. In those societies that have a greater occurrence of certain kinds of hermaphroditic or intersexed infants than elsewhere, there sometimes are social categories beyond the standard two into which such babies can be placed. But even in such societies, categories that go beyond the basic two are often seen as anomalous, and even where sex assignment seemed straightforward at birth, an individual may develop a gender identity different from the one initially assigned on the basis of anatomical criteria. Transgender people may embrace the other of the two options, or they may resist gender dichotomies altogether. Kate Bornstein, a trans woman who in her 1995 book titled Gender Outlaw on Men, Women and Rest of Us, writes that biological differences between males and females determine gender by causing enduring differences in capabilities and dispositions. Higher levels of testosterone, for example, are said to lead men to be more aggressive than women, and left brain dominance is said to lead men to be more rational, while their relative lack of brain lateralization should lead women to be more emotional. But the relation between physiology and behavior is not simple. The physiology itself is more complex than is usually acknowledged. It has been shown that hormonal levels, brain activity patterns and even brain anatomy can be result of different activity as well as a cause. Men supposedly smaller corpus callosum, larger amygdala, larger premammillary nucleus are among the questionable structural differences that are supposed to account for gender differences from men's greater visual spatial skills. Not much is known about the connection between brain and physiology and behavior or cognition. Hence, about the consequences of any physiological differences scientists may be seeking or finding. Above all, brain is very flexible, changing in response to experiences. Thus, the causal relation between brain physiology and activity is completely unclear. Deborah Cameron refers to search for gender differences in biology as the new biologism, which is use of biological explanations in analysis of social situations, which is very interesting, and points out that the linguistic traits that scientists are trying to explain biologically, such as women's greater language ability, are not even themselves supported by serious linguistic study. Furthermore, those pushing for biologically based explanations of sex differences ignore the fact that the very same linguistic differences that they see between genders also correlate with race and social class, and many of the sex differences they cite as biologically based actually vary historically and cross culturally. The flexibility of gender patterns is remarkable. However, this does not preclude a substantial biological effect on gender. Schwab and his colleagues like Bao have discussed the interdependent biological processes involved in the formation of reproductive system and in the subsequent sexual differentiation of the brain. In boys, the penis, prostate and scrotum are formed during fetal weeks of 6 to 12. This begins under the influence of Y-linked SRY gene and continues with the production of testosterone and other chemicals like dihydrotestosterone. In girls, the development of the sexual organs primarily depends on absence of large amounts of androgen. The masculinization or feminization of nervous system and behavior occurs later in gestation and results predominantly from the permanent organizing effects of testosterone in second trimester of the development. Let us now try to understand sex differentiation and brain functioning. Brain areas that show sex differences that relate to gender include the bed nucleus of stria terminalis, the third interstitial nucleus of the anterior hypothalamus, and the shape of corpus callosum. At puberty, the brain circuits that have been organized prenatally are activated by sex steroids, hence the term activational effects. In addition to this large effect of prenatal androgen, there are also genetic and epigenetic influences on the sexual differentiation of the brain during the second trimester. Associated with the sexual differentiation of the brain are medical conditions that are more common in the females. For example, anorexia nervosa, bulimia and Alzheimer's disease, or in males, autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder ADHD and stuttering. Prenatal androgens such as testosterone have also been implicated in the etiology of transgender identity. Transgender individuals have a gender identity that differs from their assigned sex, and in this regard there is a preponderance of males over females. Some transgender individuals seek medical intervention to transition from one sex to another and are referred to as transsexuals. As with transgender individuals, male to female transsexuals, that is MTF, are more common than female to male transsexuals, that is FTM. Transgender identity is not related in any substantial way to sexual orientation, suggesting different etiological pathways. Twin studies have provided evidence of a strong genetic influence on transgender identity as reported by Helens and others, and there are number of studies indicating MTF individuals showing atypical cerebral networks in both grey and white matter structures. All this also has been reviewed by Saraswat and his colleagues. Overall, the characteristics of transgender individuals suggest a behavioral trait that is fixed early in development and is not substantially influenced by social factors. Let us now try to understand about the role of hormones and chromosomes. The biological approach suggests there is no distinction between sex and gender, thus biological sex creates gendered behavior. Gender is determined by two biological factors, as I just said, hormones and chromosomes. Let us first talk about hormones. Hormones are chemical substances secreted by glands throughout the body and carried in the bloodstream. The same sex hormones occur in both men and women, but differ in amounts and in the effect that they have upon different parts of the body. Testosterone is a sex hormone which is more present in males than females and affects development and behavior both before and after birth. Testosterone, when released in the womb, causes the development of male sex organs at 7 weeks and acts upon hypothalamus, which results in masculinization of the brain. Testosterone can cause aggression, competitiveness, visuospatial abilities, higher sexual drive, etc., which are usually correlated with male behavior. An area of hypothalamus at the base of the brain called the sexually dimorphic nucleus is much larger in male than in females. At the same time, testosterone acts on developing brain. The brain is divided into two hemispheres, left and right. In all humans, the left side of the brain is more specialized for language skills and the right for non-verbal and spatial skills. Shavets and others used MRI scans to examine brain while men and women carried out language tasks and found that women used both hemispheres, left only used by men. It is very interesting. It appears that in males, brain hemispheres work more independently than in females and testosterone influences this brain lateralization. Hines studied female babies born to mothers who had been given injections of male hormones during pregnancy to prevent miscarriage. They were found to be more aggressive than normal female children. Hines concluded that extra testosterone in the womb had affected the later's behavior. Apart from hormones, chromosomes also has a strong impact. The normal human body contains 23 pairs of chromosomes. A chromosome is a long thin structure containing thousands of genes which are biochemical units of heredity and govern the development of every human being. Each pair of chromosome controls different aspects of development and biological sex is determined by the 23rd chromosome pair. Chromosomes physically resemble the letters X and Y. Males are represented by X, Y and females are represented by XX. At about 6 weeks, SRY gene, which is the sex determining region Y gene, the SRY gene on Y chromosome causes the gonads, which are the sex organs of the embryo, to develop as testes. If the embryo has no Y chromosome, it will not have the SRY gene. Without SRY gene, the gonads will develop as ovaries. Sometimes the SRY gene is missing from the Y chromosome or does not activate. The fetus grows, is born and lives as a little girl and later as a woman, but her chromosomes are XY. Such people are usually clearly women to themselves and everyone else. Koopman and others found that mice that were genetically female developed into male mice if the SRY gene was implanted. One of the most controversial uses of this discovery was as a means for gender verification at Olympic Games under a system implemented by International Olympic Committee in 1992. Athletes with a SRY gene were not permitted to participate as females. Friends, let us now understand Turner and Klinefelter syndrome, which is very important component of genetic makeup. Individuals with atypical chromosomes develop differently than individuals with typical chromosomes socially, physically and cognitively. Studying people with Turner syndrome and Klinefelter syndrome might help our understanding of gender, because by studying people with atypical sex chromosomes and comparing their development with that of people with typical sex chromosomes, researchers are able to establish which types of behavior are genetic, for example, determined by chromosomes. Turner syndrome, which is represented by XO, occurs when females develop with only one X chromosome on chromosome 23rd, which is almost 1 in 5,000 chance. The absence of the second X chromosome results in a child with a female external appearance but whose ovaries have failed to develop. This physical characteristic of individuals with Turner syndrome include lack of maturation at puberty and webbing of the neck. In addition to physical differences, there are differences in cognitive skills and behavioral skills compared with typical chromosome patterns. The affected individuals have higher than average verbal ability but lower than average spatial ability, visual memory and mathematical skills. They also have difficulty in social adjustment at school and generally have poor relationships with their peers. Klinefelter syndrome, represented by XXY, affects 1 in every 750 males. In addition to having a Y chromosome, these men also have an additional X on the 23rd chromosome, leading to the arrangement of XXY. Physically, they appear male, though the effect of the additional X chromosome causes less body hair and underdeveloped genitals. The syndrome becomes noticeable in childhood as the boy has poor language skills. At 3 years of age, the child may still not talk. At school, their poor language skills affect reading ability. When they are babies, their temperament is described as passive and cooperative. This calmness and shyness remain with them throughout their lives. This suggests that level of aggression have a biological rather than environmental component. Friends, there are also very interesting and significant evolutionary explanations of gender. As the evolutionary approach is a biological one, it suggests that aspects of human behavior have been coded by our genes because they were or are adaptive. A central claim of evolutionary approach is that the brain and therefore the mind evolved to solve problems encountered by our hunter-gatherer ancestors during the Upper Pleistocene period over 10,000 years ago. The evolutionary approach argues that gender role division appears as an adaptation to the challenges faced by ancestral humans in the EEA, which is the environment of evolutionary adaptation. Biologically oriented theories have also been proposed to explain gender development and differentiation. Evolutionary psychology is one such theory that views gender differentiation as ancestrally programmed. The ancestral origin of differences in gender roles is analyzed in terms of mate preferences, reproductive strategies, parental investment in offspring, and the aggressive nature of males. Viewed from this perspective, contemporary gender differences originated from successful ancestral adaptation to the different reproductive demands faced by men and women. Men contributed less to their offspring's chances of survival, so they sought multiple partners and were less choosy with whom to mate. In addition, uncertainty of paternity raised the risk of investing resources in children who were not their own. In contrast, women have to carry the fetus and care for their offspring years after their birth. Women adapted to their greater imposed role in reproduction and parenting by preferring fewer sexual partners and favoring those who would be good long-term providers of the basic necessities of life for themselves and their offspring. Men, in contrast, attempted to maximize the likelihood of paternity by reproducing with numerous young and physically attractive females, suggestive of high fertility. Because of their size and strength advantage, males resolved problems arising from conflicting reproductive interests by exercising aggressive dominance over females. Coercive force enables males to control female sexuality and to mate with many females. As a legacy of this evolutionary history, women have come to invest more heavily than men in parenting roles. Males in turn evolved into aggressors, social dominators and prolific matters because such behavior increased their success in propagating their genes. According to evolutionary psychology, many current gender differences such as the number of sexual partners preferred, criteria for selecting sexual partners, aggression, jealousy and the roles they fulfill originated from the ancestral sex differentiated reproductive strategies. For example, the findings that men prefer women who are young and physically attractive and women prefer men who are financially well resourced as mates are considered supportive of biological selection. Psychological evolutionists are also quick to invoke evolved behavioral traits as cultural universals, whereas biological evolutionists emphasize functional relations between organism and situated environment that underscores the diversifying selection influence of variant ecological contexts. It should also be noted that evolutionary psychology grounds gender differences in ancestral mating strategies, but it does not address at all the developmental changes that occur in gender conceptions and gendered conduct. Nor does it specify the determinants and mechanisms governing developmental changes across the life course. The mind is equipped with instincts that enable our ancestors to survive and reproduce. The two sexes develop different strategies to ensure their survival and reproductive success. This explains why men and women differ psychologically. They tend to occupy different social roles. To support the evolutionary perspective, the division of labor was shown to be an advantage. 10,000 years ago, there was division of labor between males and females. Men were hunter-gatherers, breadwinners, while mother was at home looking after the children. Hunting for food required speed, agility, good visual perception. So, men developed this skill. If a woman was to hunt, This would reduce the group's reproductive success as the woman was the one who was pregnant or producing milk. Although the women could contribute to the important tasks and business of growing food, making clothing and shelter and so on. This enhances reproductive success, but it also is important in avoiding starvation and additional adaptive advantage. Deterministic approach, which implies that men and women have little choice or control over their behaviors. Women are natural nurturers and men are naturally aggressive and competitive. Let us briefly discuss the biosocial approach to gender. The biosocial approach is an interactionist approach whereby nature and nurture both play a role in gender development. John Money's theory was that once a biological male or female is born, social labeling and differential treatment of boys and girls interact with biological factors to steer development. This theory was an attempt to integrate the influences of nature and nurture. Gender role preferences are determined by a series of critical events in prenatal and postnatal stages. In prenatal stage, exposure to hormones in the womb is determined by chromosomes. Biology caused by genetics, XY for a boy and XX for a girl will give them a physical sex. In postnatal stage, parents and others label and react towards a child on the basis of his or her genitals. It is when their sex has been labeled through external genitals, their gender development will begin. The social labeling of a baby as a boy or a girl leads to different treatment, which produces the child's sense of gender identity. As we have discussed in our earlier lessons, societies view gender as having two categories, masculine and feminine, and see man and women as different species. The way they are treated socially in combination with their biological sex will determine the child's gender. This approach assumes that gender identity is neutral before the age of 3 and can be changed. For example, a biological boy raised as a girl will develop the gender identity of a girl. This is known as theory of neutrality. Biological evidence for gender differences certainly exists, but its interpretation remains very controversial. It must be weighed against the evidence to which we next turn of cultural variations in the experience of gender and of socialization differences by gender. One thing which is very clear, my dear friends, is to the extent we accept biological explanations for gender, we imply that existing gender differences and gender inequality must continue to exist. This implication prompts many social scientists to be quite critical of the biological viewpoint. As Linda Lindsay notes, biological arguments are consistently drawn upon to justify gender inequality and the continued oppression of women. In contrast, cultural and social explanations of gender differences and gender inequality promise some hope for change. The biological view of gender is supported by those cross-cultural studies that have found universal features of gender. For example, in all cultures studied, men are found to be more aggressive than women, which suggests an innate biological difference. Similarly, Buss and others studied what women and men look for in a potential mate in a large number of cultures and found that while men consistently prioritized youth and physical attractiveness, women placed a higher premium on wealth and status. These differences may reflect biological differences between women and men that have arisen because of evolutionary process. However, it is important not to ignore the fact that these are considerable differences between some cultures in their gender behavior. When different cultures behave in different ways, this supports a role of learning. Friends, let us now summarize this lesson. Gender is highly variable across individuals and across societies. There is much evidence that prenatal influences of both genes and sex steroid hormones contribute to the determination of gender. Such biological influences provide the substrate upon which social factors are built upon. In that sense, they may provide the key to what we perceive as gender. Thank you.